I walked into the gala surrounded by laughter, clinking glasses, and people dressed in silk and diamonds. My parents had invited me to this family celebration, but the moment I saw the seating chart, I knew exactly where I stood in their eyes. They put me at table 8, near the exit, surrounded by distant relatives and strangers, while my parents, my siblings, the important ones, sat at the center, basking in the spotlight. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a message. That night I had a choice: stay silent like I always had, or finally walk away, so I did. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. I should have known better than to expect anything different. But part of me still wanted to believe things had changed. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday, tucked neatly between a stack of mail. Bills, grocery coupons, and an alumni magazine I never subscribed to. It stood out immediately, thick and heavy, the kind of paper you don't throw away without a second thought. Black and gold, embossed letters spelling out a name that wasn't mine, but still belonged to me. I turned the card over, scanning the details. The event was at the Langford, one of those old money hotels in the city, known for its chandeliers and 6-course dinners. Saturday at 7 p.m., cocktail attire, valet parking available. I should have just tossed it in the trash. Instead, I sat at my kitchen counter, the invitation in my hands, my fingers tracing over the raised lettering. I should have known better than to believe this was anything more than an obligation, a formality. My parents didn't invite me because they wanted me there. They invited me because not inviting me would have been worse. Still, a part of me, some small, pathetic part, wanted to go. I exhaled, closing my eyes for a moment. Family gatherings had always been like this. I could still remember Christmas dinners, birthdays, anniversaries, times when I had tried to insert myself into their world, only to realize I was just background noise in a conversation I wasn't meant to be part of. Once, when I was 10, I had worked up the courage to speak at the dinner table. My siblings were talking about something important: college applications, SAT scores, things that mattered in the Monroe household. I had been so excited to share that I had won a writing contest at school. But before I could finish my sentence, my father had interrupted, asking my brother about his upcoming debate tournament. The conversation had shifted without hesitation, without acknowledgement, like I had never spoken at all. I had swallowed my words that night, pushing my plate away even though I wasn't full. I had learned, in that moment, that my voice didn't carry weight in that house. And now, all these years later, sitting in my cramped apartment holding this invitation, I realized I still felt like that 10-year-old girl, waiting for a moment that would never come. I placed the invitation down, staring at it like it might change under my gaze. I could just ignore it. Send a polite excuse via text, something short and effortless. Sorry, I can't make it. Hope it's a wonderful evening. That would be the simplest thing to do. But then, they would win. They would get to pretend I was the one who distanced myself, that I was too busy, too caught up in my own life to attend. And I could already hear my mother's voice, soft but laced with judgment. Isla has always been like this. She isolates herself. Number not this time. If they wanted me to be there, I would be there, on my terms. I stood up, walking toward my closet. If I was going to attend, I wouldn't do it meekly. No more blending in, no more fading into the background. I reached for the back of my closet where a deep emerald green dress hung, untouched since the day I bought it. It was elegant but bold, the kind of dress that demanded attention, the kind of dress that made people look twice. I ran my fingers over the fabric, then nodded to myself. If they were going to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make it impossible to ignore me. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the last few details. Earrings, a touch of perfume, lipstick one shade darker than I usually wore. The reflection staring back at me was composed, but my stomach twisted with unease. What if nothing has changed? What if this is just another night where you end up feeling like a stranger in your own family? I shook the thought away. It was too late to back out now. I grabbed my clutch, exhaled one last time, and walked toward the door. The car ride was quiet. The city lights blurred past as the cab made its way to the hotel, the hum of the radio filling the space. I stared out the window, watching the world move around me, feeling strangely detached from it all. Then, before I knew it, we were there. The Langford stood tall, its golden doors gleaming under the soft evening lights. Valets moved smoothly, taking keys from guests who stepped out of cars far more expensive than mine. Inside, through the glass doors, I could see the glow of chandeliers, people in silk and velvet laughing as they sipped champagne. I paid the driver, stepped out, and smoothed down my dress. My heels clicked against the pavement as I approached the entrance, shoulders back, chin high. If nothing else, I wouldn't let them see me hesitate. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The distance, the disconnection. Every chandelier, every expensive dress, every polite smile. It was all calculated, a show, a performance. And I was nothing more than a guest at my own family's event. I scanned the room, searching for my parents. Did they even know I was here? Did it even matter? As I took a step forward, I could already feel the weight of the evening pressing down on me. I had made my choice. Now I had to live through it. I told myself it was just a mistake, some oversight, some last-minute seating adjustment that had nothing to do with me. But I knew better. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt the weight of the evening settle over me like a heavy coat. The chandeliers sparkled above, catching the light in their crystal arms, while waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through the room, balancing trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of laughter that comes from people who know they belong. I scanned the room, searching for my parents. Elliot and Vivian Monroe had always been the center of every event they hosted, their presence magnetic, their movements effortless. And there they were, standing by the main table surrounded by guests who had their full attention, their smiles calculated and bright. My father's hand rested on my mother's back as she laughed at something a well-dressed man beside her had said. They looked like royalty, perfectly placed at the heart of the celebration, and I was nowhere near them. I glanced down at the seating chart displayed at the entrance. Table 1, Elliot, Vivian, Graham, Celeste. The list continued, packed with familiar last names, people who had always been part of their world. My name was further down. Table 8, near the exit. I stood there for a moment, staring at the small, impersonal letters of my name, tucked between the names of distant relatives and business acquaintances I barely knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I forced my feet forward, weaving through the room until I reached my assigned seat. The table was positioned just far enough from the center of the room that I could still see everything, but I wasn't part of it. The floral arrangements were smaller here, the table settings not quite as elaborate. Even the chair I pulled out felt lighter, less substantial than the ones at the main table. It was all intentional. I sat down, smoothing the fabric of my dress as I took in the people around me. An older couple I vaguely recognized from past events, a man I assumed was someone's business partner, and a woman who looked equally out of place. No one glanced up. No one acknowledged my presence. This wasn't new. I could still remember a birthday dinner years ago, my mother's maybe, where I had arrived to find my seat shoved at the very end of the table, barely within earshot of the conversation. That night, I had told myself it didn't matter, that seating was just seating. But I had spent the entire meal feeling like an afterthought, forced to smile and nod as I listened to a conversation I wasn't truly part of. And here I was again. Across the room, Graham caught my eye and grinned. He lifted his champagne glass slightly in my direction, a mock toast, before turning back to his conversation. My jaw clenched. Celeste, seated beside him, didn't meet my gaze. I reached for my water glass, trying to steady my hands. Fine. Let them have their polished conversations, their well-rehearsed stories. Let them believe I didn't belong here. A waiter appeared beside me, offering a drink. I reached for a glass of champagne, only for another guest to lean over and interrupt. "Oh, sorry, I think that one's for me," she said, her voice light, her smile apologetic but dismissive. I let my hand drop. It wasn't worth it. Dinner was served. Plates were placed in front of us, delicate portions of roasted duck, truffle, mashed potatoes, a drizzle of something artistic along the edge of the plate. I picked up my fork, pretending to focus on my meal, but the murmurs of the room crept into my ears. From my seat, I could hear my father's voice, clear and commanding, leading a conversation about something important. Politics, business, something that mattered in his world. My mother was talking to a woman beside her, laughing softly, her posture relaxed. Graham was speaking to a senator's son, a conversation that sounded effortless and warm. I swallowed my resentment along with my first bite of food. A guest beside me turned, glancing at my place setting before offering me a polite smile. "So, whose +1 are you?" My grip tightened around my fork. I could feel the way my shoulders stiffened, the way the air in my lungs suddenly felt too thick. I forced a smile. "I'm not a +1. The woman blinked, her expression shifting to something resembling confusion before she recovered. "Oh, I just assumed—" She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "I mean, I don't think we've met before." Of course we hadn't, because I wasn't important enough to be remembered. I could have explained who I was. I could have said, "Actually, I'm Elliot and Vivian Monroe's daughter. You know, the people at the main table?" I could have let the words sit between us like a challenge, like a demand for recognition. But I didn't, because the truth was it wouldn't have mattered. So I just nodded, turning back to my plate, my appetite gone. Time stretched on, each conversation around me a reminder that I wasn't supposed to be part of them. No one in my family had acknowledged my placement. No one had offered me a seat at the main table. And why would they? They didn't expect me to say anything. They thought I would sit here, quietly, just like I always had. They thought I would swallow my pride, smile through the discomfort, pretend that this was just another harmless seating arrangement. They were wrong. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something, to glance my way, to acknowledge the insult that had been written into the very fabric of the evening, to meet my eyes with something other than detached politeness. But no one did. The laughter carried on, the wine flowed freely, and my family remained exactly as they always had, composed, polished, effortlessly at home in a world that had never made space for me. I picked up my glass, swirling the golden liquid inside, watching the bubbles rise to the surface before settling into stillness. Just like me, always waiting, always on the outside looking in. And then my father stood. The room quieted almost immediately, as if some invisible force commanded attention the moment Elliot Monroe opened his mouth. A waiter, sensing the shift, stepped back from the table. Conversations faded into silence. I sat still, watching as my father lifted his glass, his expression warm, proud. He surveyed the room, his guests, his carefully curated world, before speaking. 35 years, he began, his voice steady, carrying with practiced ease. 35 years of building something meaningful, of strengthening the values that define who we are. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to remain expressionless. Family has always been the foundation of everything we do, he continued. It is what anchors us, what drives us forward. Tonight, we celebrate not just longevity, but legacy. A legacy built on hard work, dedication, and above all, unity. Unity. The word twisted something deep inside me, because wasn't that the greatest lie of all? I glanced at my mother, seated beside him, her smile small, perfectly measured. Her hand rested on the stem of her wine glass, fingers adorned with the rings she had worn for decades, symbols of wealth, of commitment, of a life devoted to maintaining the very image my father was now speaking about. Celeste sat on the other side, her shoulders tense, her eyes trained on the tablecloth. Graham, however, was completely at ease, nodding along with our father's words as if they were absolute truth. I looked down at my hands, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle over me. Because he wasn't talking about our family. He was talking about the family they had built without me. I had always been the exception, the outlier, the one who didn't fit into their narrative. I had spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, if I molded myself into something more palatable, maybe, just maybe, They would finally see me. But they never did, and they never would. I let go of my glass, letting it settle on the table as I quietly pushed back my chair. My hands were steady as I reached for my clutch, my heartbeat even. If they weren't going to acknowledge my presence, then they wouldn't notice my absence. I didn't belong here. I never had. The fabric of my dress whispered against my skin as I stood, smoothing down the material. The movement was subtle, deliberate, unrushed. I turned, taking my first step away from the table, from the evening, from all of it. And then, Ela. The sound of my mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. I stopped. Just for a second, just long enough to hear the soft scrape of her chair as she turned toward me. Her voice was smooth, carefully modulated, but I could hear it, the quiet thread of irritation beneath the surface. Where are you going? I didn't turn around, didn't meet her gaze, didn't allow myself even the smallest moment of hesitation. I just took another step forward, and then another, and for once, I didn't look back. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something. No one did. The dinner carried on as if nothing had happened. Silverware clinked against porcelain, glasses were raised in well-practiced toasts, and conversation swirled effortlessly around me, like I wasn't even there. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, every guest, every family member playing their role to perfection, and I was the silence between their words. Across the room, my father stood, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit before tapping a spoon against his glass. The sound cut through the murmur of the room, and almost instantly the conversations quieted. I watched as he smiled, that perfect, charismatic smile, the one he had mastered over the years, the one that could charm a room full of strangers and make them believe anything he said. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm, carrying an ease that only came with power. 35 years ago, Vivian and I built a life together, and in those years, we have been blessed with more than we could ever ask for: good fortune, lasting friendships, and most importantly, family. The word family landed like a slap. I shifted in my seat, gripping the stem of my glass as my mother beamed at him from her place at the main table, her fingers lightly resting against his wrist. She looked radiant, effortlessly elegant in her midnight blue gown, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. My father continued, raising his glass slightly. "Family is the foundation of everything we stand for. It is what keeps us strong, what binds us together even in the hardest of times." I waited for him to acknowledge me, waited for some subtle glance in my direction, for the faintest recognition that I was part of this family he spoke so highly of. It never came. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Graham, his eldest son, the one who carried his name and his pride. They moved to Celeste, his golden daughter, the one who never disappointed. But when his gaze passed over where I sat, it did so without stopping, as if I were just another face in the crowd, unremarkable, forgettable. A hollow laugh almost escaped me. Of course. I set my glass down with more force than necessary, the quiet clink barely registering over the applause that followed. The guests lifted their glasses, toasting to an image of unity that had never included me. I watched as Graham leaned in, whispering something to the senator's son, both of them chuckling under their breath. Celeste glanced at me briefly, but her expression was unreadable, carefully neutral. And that's when it hit me. I could disappear right now and no one would notice. No one would ask where I had gone. No one would wonder if I was okay. Because to them, I had never really been here in the first place. The realization settled into my bones, heavy and undeniable. I had spent years trying to carve out space for myself in this family, trying to earn their approval, to prove that I belonged, that I mattered. But I didn't, and I never would. My heart pounded, the weight of the evening pressing down on me until it became unbearable. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick, suffocating. My hands curled into fists in my lap as I made a decision I should have made years ago. I pushed my chair back and stood. The movement was quiet, barely noticeable, but for me, it felt seismic. I smoothed down the front of my dress, squared my shoulders, and turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No one turned to ask where I was going. I took my first step away, heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor, then another, and just as I reached the edge of the room, just as my fingers brushed against the door that would lead me out, my mother's voice cut through the air. "Isla, where are you going?" Every muscle in my body tensed. The room didn't go silent, not completely, but there was a noticeable shift in attention. A few guests turned their heads slightly, curious but uninterested. My father, still standing at the head of the table, barely spared me a glance. I could feel the weight of my mother's eyes on me, expectant, waiting for an answer. For once, I didn't hesitate. My phone started buzzing the second I left. I had barely stepped out into the night air before the first call came in. Vivian Monroe, my mother, her name flashing insistently on the screen like an emergency warning. I didn't answer. By the time I reached the end of the hotel's long, curved driveway, 3 more calls had come through. Elliot, Graham, then my mother again. The buzzing felt relentless, vibrating against my palm with a desperation I recognized all too well. I slipped my phone into my clutch, ignoring it. The cold night air bit against my skin as I walked, but I didn't shiver. I felt numb, detached, my body moving forward even as my mind replayed the last few moments inside. My father's voice, steady and powerful, speaking about family unity while deliberately pretending I didn't exist. The way my mother's voice had called after me, not with concern, but with expectation. As if she had known I would stop, that I would turn back and do what was expected of me. I had always been predictable, the daughter who swallowed her resentment, who played along with their carefully curated family narrative, who never made a scene. But not tonight. I walked until the noise of the gala faded behind me, until the grand facade of the hotel was just another building in the cityscape. Then, without thinking, I turned the corner and stepped into a bar. The place was quiet, dimly lit, the low hum of jazz music curling through the air. It smelled like aged whiskey and polished wood, a stark contrast to the champagne-scented excess of the ballroom I had just escaped. I slid onto a bar stool, exhaling as I placed my clutch on the counter. The bartender, a man with graying hair and an easy smile, took one look at me and nodded. "Rough night?" I let out a short, breathy laugh. Something like that. He nodded again as if he understood without needing to ask more. Moments later, a whiskey sour appeared in front of me, golden and perfect. I wrapped my fingers around the glass, the chill grounding me. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, staring at the ice melting in my drink, before I finally pulled out my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications, 32 missed calls, 68 messages, family group chat, 99 plus unread messages. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening as I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the group chat before I tapped it open. The messages loaded all at once, filling the screen in a rapid-fire assault of texts, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and carefully disguised guilt-tripping. "Elliot, this is embarrassing. You need to fix it." "Vivian, we were trying to include you. You always do this." "Graham, enjoy playing the victim." "Aunt Caroline, sweetheart, what happened? Everyone's worried." "Celeste, I get it. Are you okay?" I stared at Celeste's message, the only one that didn't come laced with expectation or passive-aggressive disappointment. "Are you okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. I had spent years wondering how things would change if I finally said something, if I finally stopped being silent, if I finally walked away instead of waiting to be seen. And now that I had, the world hadn't ended. The city outside still pulsed with life. The bar was still warm and steady around me. My family, for all their carefully controlled power, couldn't pull me back into their orbit unless I let them. I took another sip of my drink, the citrus bite settling into something softer. Then, without second-guessing, I swiped out of the chat and opened my photo album. I scrolled past a dozen meaningless snapshots, receipts, a blurry skyline, an old picture of me and Celeste as kids, until I found what I was looking for, the seating chart. I had taken a picture of it the moment I arrived, before I even reached my table. It was a reflex, a habit formed over years of documenting the little ways I was pushed aside. Table 1. Elliot, Vivian, Graham, Celeste. Table 8, Isla Monroe, placed among distant relatives and strangers. I stared at it for a moment, then clicked Share. Instagram. The caption typed itself. Guess I finally know where I stand. I hit post. Almost instantly, my phone vibrated again. Likes, comments, messages flooding in as the post made its way into the world. Within minutes, the family group chat exploded. Vivian, Isla, take that post down right now. Graham, this is ridiculous. What are you trying to prove? Elliot, you are blowing this out of proportion. This is not how family behaves. Aunt Caroline, oh, honey, this isn't necessary. Can we talk? My lips curled into something resembling a smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes, because I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't upset because of what they had done. They weren't reflecting on why I had walked away in the first place. Number. They were panicking because I had made it public, because for the first time, they couldn't control the narrative. For years, I had been silent. I had let them dictate my place, allowed them to define me in ways that suited their image. But now, the world could see what I had always known. I took another sip of my drink, my grip on the glass steady. Let them panic. I didn't expect them to care, but they did. Oh, they definitely did. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the first thing I registered was the faint, rhythmic buzzing from my nightstand. It was relentless, vibrating against the wooden surface in a steady pulse. I exhaled slowly before reaching for my phone. The screen was lit up with a wall of notifications, missed calls, messages, email alerts. A familiar sense of dread coiled in my stomach. But this time, it wasn't enough to make me panic. I already knew what it was. I tapped the screen, scrolling past a dozen missed calls from Vivian Monroe, a handful from Elliot, and an ungodly amount of texts from Graham. The family group chat was a disaster, an unfiltered mess of damage control, fake concern, and anger. I clicked it open. Elliot, take the post down. Vivian, this isn't how a family should behave. Graham, you love being the victim, don't you? Aunt Caroline, oh, sweetheart, this is getting out of hand. Call your mother. Uncle Henry, I don't know what happened last night, but let's not make this worse than it needs to be. Vivian, again, Isla, answer your phone. I should have felt something. Guilt, anger, maybe even a little satisfaction, but instead I felt nothing, because it was all so predictable. My family wasn't upset about what they had done. They weren't reflecting on why I had left, why I had finally reached my breaking point. Number. They were upset because I had made it public, because my Instagram post, one simple picture of the seating chart, captioned with nothing but a single pointed sentence, had cracked their carefully curated image. For years, they had controlled the narrative. I was the difficult one, the distant one, the daughter who never tried hard enough to be part of the family. They had painted a picture in which they were blameless, where I was the one pulling away, the one making things harder than they needed to be. And now? Now the world could see what I had always known. I scrolled past more messages, my grip on the phone tightening as I skimmed through the words. Vivian's tone had shifted from demanding to guilt-tripping. Vivian, this is tearing our family apart. We didn't mean to hurt you. You're making this bigger than it is. I clenched my jaw, breathing deeply before exhaling through my nose. I had heard those words before. So many times I could predict the next line. You're overreacting, Isla. You always do. But I wasn't. For years, I had been bending myself into shapes that fit their expectations. I had shrunk myself to avoid conflict, smiled through hurt, nodded along when they dismissed my feelings, let their words define me. And I had let them convince me that I was the problem, that I was the one who needed to try harder, that if I just let things go, if I just let them love me in their own way, everything would be fine. But love isn't conditional. Love doesn't come with a hierarchy, a seating arrangement, an unspoken rule that some people matter more than others. Love doesn't require you to disappear to make space for everyone else. And for the first time in my life, I saw it clearly. My finger hovered over the group chat, the cursor blinking in the text box. I could have responded. I could have typed out everything I wanted to say, the years of resentment, the memories of being sidelined, the way last night had only solidified what I had always known. But I didn't, because they wouldn't hear me. They never had. Instead, I scrolled past their messages, past the manipulations and excuses, until I reached the only text that mattered. Celeste, I get it. Are you okay? I exhaled, something loosening in my chest. Celeste, the only one who had said anything that wasn't meant to push, to demand, to guilt. I hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before I finally typed my response. Me. Yeah, I actually think I am. Then, without giving myself a chance to overthink it, I swiped to the top of the family group chat and hit mute notifications. I wasn't blocking them. I wasn't deleting them. But I was choosing silence. For the first time, their voices didn't get to be the loudest in my head. I set my phone down on the nightstand and stretched, my muscles stiff from tension I hadn't realized I was still holding. The hotel room was bathed in soft morning light, the city below already humming with life. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet pressing against the cool floor. The air smelled like fresh coffee and something sweet, probably the bakery downstairs opening for the day. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down by expectations. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. I stood, grabbed a sweater from my suitcase and slipped it over my head. Then, without checking my phone again, I walked toward the door, stepping into the morning air, into a city that had no idea who I was or what had happened the night before. And for the first time, I felt free. I stepped outside, feeling the crisp morning air wrap around me, light and unburdened. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I had found my own. Families are complicated. Love should be unconditional, but sometimes people love in ways that only serve their own image, not the person in front of them. The hardest lesson isn't walking away from those who don't see you. It's realizing that their validation was never the thing you needed in the first place. We all have a choice, to keep trying to fit where we don't belong or to create a space where we do. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest act of love is the one we give ourselves. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life truly sees you for who you are?